All right, there we go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another version of our Gaming Next weekly news live stream. The weeks are absolutely flying by as we get up to Christmas. That's certainly how I feel. Me and Connor are on today from England. I don't think there's any change in Prime Minister or King's coronation or anything like that happening today. I'm pretty sure the most exciting thing is Gareth Southgate's World Cup squad announcement that's happening at the same time as us this week. So, yeah, we've avoided those controversies. How are you doing, guys? And Nico, where are you joining us from today?
I'm actually joining you from Austria, from Salzburg once again. So being here work-wise, and yeah, shout out once again to the two of you. Thanks for having me because I've been away for quite a while. So I'm back, right? I didn't die. Yeah, I'm back.
It's great to have you back, Nico. It's never the same without you. But you're always on the move. Were you at Sigma last week? No, sorry, Sigma's coming up, isn't it? Where there's so many trade shows, I can't even keep track anymore.
Exactly. So
Sigma's next
next
week.
week. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Now each and everybody just realized that the both of you are in England because each and everybody else from iGaming Next located in Malta, I'm pretty sure he's already kind of preparing him or herself for the traffic jam or the traffic madness, and even more and more gaming people actually flying into the Pirate Bay and the Pirate Island.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
I'm going to get there on Monday night, Tuesday morning, and I'm expecting a very busy airport and a very busy island, but I'm looking forward to it. It's actually going to be, even though I've worked in gaming for 4.5 years now, it's going to be my first ever Sigma. And it's one of those shows that you hear a lot of rumors about, you hear a lot of stories from, but I've never seen it for myself, so I'm very excited, I must say.
Yeah, well, it's going to be lively, that's for sure. I'm flying over as well, so you can meet all of the iGaming Next team hopefully next week if you're based in Malta. I want to say hello to all of our viewers in Malta as well. Feel free to comment in the chat box on the right hand side, and obviously all of our viewers globally. We really appreciate your support every week, and also the support of our sponsors, Playson and Zimpler, who are doing an amazing job. So we've got a pretty packed agenda once again this week. We've got quite a lot more talking points about the US as usual. But as we seem to talk about that most weeks, we thought it would be really good to start somewhere different today. And we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on Brazil, a really interesting country and LATAM market, obviously. And we have a special guest who I think Nico knows pretty well, who can hopefully keep us up to date with gambling regulation in the country. And also, you know, what the re-election of Lula as president might mean for the gambling industry. So, Nico, should we bring Bernardo on?
Yes, of course. There he is.
Here he is. Hi, Bernardo. How are you?
All good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
I think Nico's going to ask you some questions about Brazil, but just before we do that, do you want to introduce yourself quickly and your company and your background in Brazil and LATAM and Portugal?
Yeah, so actually, I'm a Portuguese. We at Touch Scanner, we are an affiliate company. We started out in Portugal, but we've been focusing in Brazil for the past 3 years. We understood that there was a gigantic market, sleeping giant that hopefully is going to wake up or is already waking up soon. And coming 2023 is going to be, I think, one of the most spoken markets in the industry, right behind the US. And that's basically what we've been doing. We've been focusing in Brazil, building a team there, and learning more about this market as we go.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jake, during the prep call, he just asked me how the both of us actually met each other and how we got in touch. It was during WGES
Yes.
when you actually came up to me asking me about this specific podcast. So it was quite interesting. And this is, where this circle actually closes itself, right? So now you're on the show. Now you're on the hot seat. Right, seeing how it actually works a little bit behind behind the scenes, and I'm just thrilled that the talks the both of us actually had during WGS and the conference in Berlin actually come true with respect to now the big audience can actually listen to what you're about to say. So just to start things off, as you already mentioned, Brazil, one of the biggest economies in the world, belonging to the top 12 based on the GDP, as you mentioned, one of the sleeping giants, which have faced one specific issue that even when in February or March, even the opposition and the in charge politicians actually try to cooperate and make iGaming happen. And Bolsonaro, he had the final vote. He voted no on this kind of approach. So each and everybody from the iGaming industry has been thrilled to see if Bolsonaro will be able to keep up with his no, or if Lula will actually change things, and the sleeping giant of Brazil might become reality. So with Lula now in charge, are you already seeing things about to change, or what might change from your perspective?
So in the past 4 years, the market has been waiting regulation. So it was legalized in 2018, and it has been consecutively being pushed ahead. I guess up to the limit, which is going to be 12 of December. So there was a law introduced in 18 that would allow the regulation of gambling, and the time frame would have to be up to 12 of December of this year. So the only reason, in my opinion, that this hasn't happened so far is because of the elections itself. So Bolsonaro, the current president, has a big support from the religious groups. There's active religious parties in the country. And once, as you mentioned in the beginning of the year, there was a movement coming, but Bolsonaro advisors told him to hold on a little bit because that could create more damage to his campaign. And so now with Lula is a completely different thing. But even before Lula, so I believe Bolsonaro is going to now let the regulation go through until the limit of the date limit, because he has nothing to lose anymore. But definitely with Lula coming into the picture, things are going to move forward. First, because there's nothing against it. There's not a religious support that is preventing him to move. But second of all, because he made a lot of promises, he has a lot of social initiatives, and every sort of taxation that he can look into, it's gonna help him achieve and fulfill those promises that he made during the campaign. So regardless of we wait for the end of the year and the sportsbook arena, because there's two different movements going, one for sportsbook, another one for casino, which is actually connected as well with land-based operations. But definitely things are going to move now. And I believe that even Bolsonaro is going to let the sportsbook regulation come into place until 12th of December.
So the regulation is already in place, but it has not been active, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, they legalized the betting without having a regulation, and now the regulation has been being worked on for the past years, and it's pretty much ready, that document, and so that's why that should come in place soon.
Okay, so what kind of market sizes are we speaking about? Do you have any numbers for us, so our viewers and listeners can actually estimate what's about to happen in Brazil?
Well, it's hard to have accurate numbers. It's always a perception or extrapolation, because there's no numbers coming as a whole. There's a lot of operators. The market is very dispersed at this point. But what we can see, and as an affiliate, one of the things we look into is search volume. What is the interest of the population? And we have seen in the past 2 years a growth of close to 3 times, I would say, in the last 24 months. Brand search for brands like Bet365, like Betano, which is a big brand that has been doing a big push in Brazil, Betfair, Sporting Tech, all of the big ones that have been there in the last years. Their brand searches have been increased a lot. In some cases even over the 3 times, 4 or 5 times. This obviously is connected with the marketing efforts as well. But overall, all the interest in the market is clearly growing a lot from a search point perspective. Now, when it comes to revenues, I mean, it's impossible. I can only speculate. I can say, well, we generate this, we are this percentage, and so the market should be that size. But the numbers are so high, and there's no combined statistics that it's really hard for me to give you a ballpark. But if you compare it with other geographies with similar GDPs, I mean, you can get an expectation of it. I believe Brazil is going to be bigger than any market in Europe, to give you a ballpark.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Bernardo. And like you mentioned, you called out some big companies there, and obviously Brazil's a huge market already, particularly for sports betting. It was before 2018, and it has been obviously since these conversations about regulation started. I'm just wondering, what do you think kind of the significant differences will be between the market up till now and then the market when it's fully regulated? I appreciate we're probably a long way away from that, and also it'll depend on kind of what the regulation is, right?
Yeah, so it seems like the regulation is actually going to be favorable when it comes from a tax perspective. So there's going to be a tax on GGR, which is great news, and not on the turnover like happened in Portugal. There was some fear that the Brazil was going to follow the Portuguese model, which is not the model that has been working well for operators and for the market overall, and even for the players. That's why we have a huge black market happening there. Then when it comes to entry, there's going to be the expectation is going to be around 5 million euro entry fee for a 5-year license. We don't know if they're going to allow you to spread that payment or if it's going to be a upfront payment. And this is going to obviously impact a lot the way the market has been going, because so far we have different speeds of entering the market. In the last 2 years, we have brands that just started tipping their toe, not with small investments, and they're being able to operate. And in some cases, they got enough traction that then they could actually invest in the market and grow. And then there's the big companies that came in and very, very quickly were spending dozens of millions in TV and sponsorships, etc. Moving forward, the difference I think is going to be mainly that the big brands are going to continue to operate the same way. The competition is going to go to a level, I would say, like US, as we have seen in US. The acquisition cost is going to increase for the operators, but this is going to exclude smaller brands and it's going to exclude smaller operations. So I don't believe that right now there's probably hundreds, 200-300 operators that so-called are focused on Brazil. This is going to decrease substantially, I believe.
Okay, interesting. And one thing, obviously, that we hear time and time again about LATAM markets, and Brazil in particular is such a sports-driven country, is that kind of localization approach, and that's what can really, make or break your brand in the country. What are some things that you think operators should consider if they're catering, purely for Brazilian consumers, and presumably that's something you've kind of had to learn yourself as well as an affiliate going into the market?
Yeah, so first, there's a big difference between different LATAM markets. It's common we use the word LATAM and we try to say LATAM needs a localization, when the localization is so different across the board. What's happening in Argentina is completely different to what's happening in Mexico or what's happening in Brazil or Colombia. There's different cultural approaches to casino and to sportsbook. Some of these markets are already into casino, but many of them are not. Brazil is a case where there's no casino tradition, let's say, in this way. So this changes a lot compared to other countries. But when it comes to localization, obviously we know that these markets tendentially you need to go closer to the user compared to Europe, for instance, where the user doesn't want to be in touch with the people so much. They're fine with the email, with the information. They go to the chat. They want to go away as fast as possible. They don't want to be interacting. In Brazil, this happens like this. So in Brazil, everything which has to do with creating that engagement with the user, close engagement, ongoing engagement, either if it's through Telegram groups, with most operators already are doing, or by having a much higher percentage of offers or of ongoing offers, weekly offers, games. There's also a tendency to engage well with gamification. So there's some operators that have done this very well. They kind of gamify their product. And this we can see that in conversions and in player value, a big difference between those operators and the others. But overall, in the Brazilian market is not going to be anywhere close to what Europe is when it comes to player treatment, to the way that the players acquire. We are still understanding where the marketing dollars should go, where the product should be focused on. But overall, I see that it's a player base that is much more engaged on an ongoing basis with the platform, even with the sponsorships, even with the ambassadors, etc.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, indeed it is, especially as you already pointed out that, with the sleeping giant, we are speaking about a market size which will be bigger than any other European market. So the big market of the US will be joined by another one. Do you see, so you already mentioned like the big European companies already being active in the market, like the Betfair, the Bet365. Do you see any specific US company which already eyes on Brazil as well, or what's your guess on what's happening next in Brazil?
Yes, I believe that there's still a few big groups, both US and European, that haven't really focused on Brazil, haven't really put, even if they already had some brand live there. And I think this is going to be a big change. Also, going back to the previous answer, as the entry requirements are going to be heavy, we can expect the big groups to take over. There's some local companies in Brazil that also have a lot of potential, but in the end of the day, what we've seen in US, for example, with a lot of European companies coming there, like Flutter, coming there and really make a big dent, I think it's going to happen the same in Brazil. When it comes to US brand specific, I mean, brands like, for example, Leo Vegas has already been there for a while. I believe now with the acquisition, that's going to be it's going to increase their bet in the market. This is one of the examples, not necessarily a US company, but it's going to be a US-led investment, let's say, and there's going to be others for sure. I'm not aware of specific brands that already have concluded plans, because I think in the end of the day, many of these groups have been waiting for the regulation. They want the regulation to be in place, and then either if they're going to make some acquisition of smaller brand, or if they're going to go ahead and launch new brands, we'll see. But absolutely, I think that the big groups that are not there yet are going to come in during next year.
If I can jump in quickly, Bernardo, I have a question. I wonder, in terms of, it's going to be difficult, I suppose, in the first few years post-regulation to find the true size of this market, even if we get hold of those numbers, because I wonder what's in the regulations that's going to encourage a high rate of channelization and encourage punters to only use regulated brands. Is there anything in there specifically to prevent unlicensed operators from coming in? Of course, lots of regulators and governments use website blocking software, but the kind of clone websites that pop up around those brands find it quite easy, it seems, to get around that kind of thing. So obviously for major companies and big operators like some of the ones we've mentioned, their objective generally is to operate in regulated markets. But how big a potential is there, do you think, for there still to be a very large grey market in Brazil following regulation?
So in a normal circumstance, or I would say that obviously Brazil, I think would take a long time for them to be able to really tackle this issue. But there's a catch here, is that there's a payment method in Brazil called Pix. This payment method is owned by the central bank. And the statistics I get from our clients are that 90% of the transactions are made through this payment method. So I think this is going to be the number one block and regulator when it comes to that, because this is a payment method that came out last year. It went overall online transactions in Brazil in a couple of months, it was over 50% going there. And when it comes to operators, is getting close to the 90%. I think this is going to be the main regulator, since this is completely owned and managed by the central bank. If they exclude, like the operators that don't use this payment method are going to convert 5-6 times lower. So they're going to be on a competitive disadvantages right from the start. And so I believe this is going to be the main tool to regulate to regulate this issue.
That's really interesting. I suppose that must be very rare for one payment to have such dominance.
Yes, and it's hard to compete because it's central bank owned, right? So they are everywhere, not just in the gambling industry. They are across the board. All online transactions are using mainly this payment method.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Exactly, especially if the payment method is that strong and highly accepted. You know, you've been speaking about 90%. I'm pretty sure that's all the wet dreams coming true from a regulation perspective. If you just establish a make it or break it factor like this one, you don't need to deal with IP blocking, because you then just decide on whether you offer this kind of payment method to one of the license entities or not. And this is how you actually can block out and black out the market as well, or wipe out the market from a regulation perspective. I've never seen this or heard about this one in any other regulated market, to be honest.
Yes, it's a big thing. And it's actually the fact that this payment method is so good. It's very good for us affiliates. You know, conversions, as soon as this payment method came into place, conversions went up maybe 30 or 50%. And so it's a great tool to manage the market and for everyone.
Yep, that's amazing, Bernardo. We've all learned something today, so I'm sure our audience has as well. It's really good of you to join us, and nice to meet you as well. So where can people find you if they want to reach out on LinkedIn or anything like that?
I mean, they can find in LinkedIn, OddsScanner, or oddsscanner.com/corporate. You can see all our projects as well. You can check which markets we are focused in and what we are doing. And also my personal LinkedIn.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us today. It's nice to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bernardo. See you next time. Take care.
There we go. I love getting a special guest on. Who knew the Brazilian central bank was facilitating payments to the country's unregulated gambling market? Interesting stuff there.
Yeah, amazing. So good to get that perspective from someone on the ground. Someone, you know, that's the kind of thing I totally missed when I was researching what's going on in the Brazilian market at the moment. That new payment method is going to lead to one of the highest channelization rates anywhere.
That shows the value of localization, doesn't it, Connor? If you're on the ground, you would have known about it for sure.
Well, look, Jake, I would go if you offered. If you want me to go and work in Brazil, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, you can use those language skills of yours that you haven't had a chance to use on this live stream, sadly. Moving on, we're about halfway through, which is ideal timing. We're going to jump into the US, as I mentioned before. But just before we do that, let's crack on with one of our favorite features, as Nico takes it away with a weekly segment that you're all familiar with by now. So, Nico, the floor is yours.
Yeah, perfect. So as I missed out the last 5 shows, it will be now 50 in 25 minutes. So all good. just
so
playing around. The same as you. So I will just keep it very, very short. So what we already seen is like one of the biggest online casinos in Germany filed for insolvency. So this is one of the things already anticipated, as the Gauselmann Group literally took over the whole market, with nearly 85% of the licensed entity being owned by Gauselmann. So online casino Germany has filed for insolvency. Then heading over to the US, Flutter finally wins the Fox dispute on FanDuel's fair price value. So what has happened in 2020, December 2020? Fox bought a stake in FanDuel, 18.6%, and they paid roughly, if I'm not mistaken, $2 billion for this one. And this was based on an evaluation of $11.2 billion. And they also acquired rights to increase their stake or double their stake with the same price. And of course, this had been fought by Flutter, and they were going for a fair market price instead of a fixed price already. Then a quite interesting story as well, that the store owner, Mattress Mac, he overall nets a record of $75 million payout as the Houston Astros have won the World Series. Quite interesting story. So he's a shop owner, and she actually used sports betting to back his risk, as he's also was also offering like lotteries when selling his mattresses. So that's one of the biggest wins on several sports book. Another big win has been with the Southern California Powerball player, as he won a prize of 2.04 billion US dollars. So the lucky winner can now decide on either having an direct payout of roughly 900 million US dollar, or during the time of 30 years and totaling up to 2.04 billion US dollars. So I'm pretty sure we will see another player on the M&A market based on the Powerball win. Staying at WinBet continues to cut losses, and Win also has been gone live in Massachusetts as well. So from thinking about selling the overall online entity of WinBet due to Win being able to open up the first retail casino in the Saudi Arabia in Saudi Arabia. Now they are actually cutting costs in the US once again and gearing up their business. Then MGM Resorts is still bullish on BetMGM turning profitable in 2023 on the latest statements. IGT has posted 1.1 billion revenue in Q3, which is quite interesting. Then we're heading over to a UK interesting story, and thanks once again to Jake for mentioning, because the Gambling Commission has suspended the football prediction app of Libon, offered by Libon Limited, because they had failed to integrate GamStop, but they now are now fully integrated with GamStop. So as Jake just mentioned during the prep call, the suspension has already been released. Heading over to to Australia, we are seeing another big fine, as Crown has been handed a 120 million Australian dollar fine by the regulator. Just remember, by mid of October, the Star Entertainment Group has been hit with also a 100 Australian dollar fine. So the Australian regulator doesn't play around as soon as it comes to compliance or AML failings. And last but not least, TikTok shows sports bet adverts in Australia on a trial-only basis. So with Twitch stepping out of the gaming space, we now see TikTok entering that space, running test adverts for sports betting in Australia. So that's it from my end.
Awesome job, Nico.
That was amazing. I think that was only about 5.5 minutes. That's probably the fastest you've ever managed, Nico. Well done.
Yeah, he started late as well, so I'd say it was definitely within his time there. Well done, Nico. I just want to say thank you to everyone watching on LinkedIn and commenting as well. We can't see your comments appear on the right-hand side for some reason, but we're not ignoring you. So I just want to say good afternoon back to Henry, to Shahar, and to Katie, who's a good friend of our Gaming Next. Thanks for commenting on the discussion. Right, we don't have that long left, so we better delve right into the US. And I think there's probably only one place to start this week, and that is in California, where our US editor, Ryan Butler, is at the moment in San Francisco. He's probably not out of bed yet, but he's been working hard, reporting on events in the state, and particularly Proposition 27, which, as we should all know by now, was the proposition backed by the big online gambling companies in the US, DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, that would have basically legalized online sports betting in the state. That went to the ballot this week, and it was defeated spectacularly. So the results as of now are 16.7% voted yes to online sports betting, 83.3% voted against. And our good friend Ryan tweeted earlier this week saying if there was a vote to legalize homicide, it probably would have got a similar score. Let's not forget that these operators spent, I think, in excess of 600 million on this, the most expensive political campaign ever, I think, in US history. I mean, any thoughts on this, guys? It's pretty embarrassing for the industry, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I think the providing logic, and something that Ryan wrote about in his latest article on the issue, is that the tribal gaming operators who were pushing for Proposition 26, which was the alternative, which was more about land-based and horse track betting, that kind of thing, changed their objectives towards the end of the campaign. And just as FanDuel and DraftKings and the like kind of stepped away from putting more and more money into the campaign to get people to vote yes to 27, the backers of Proposition 26 kind of changed tack as well and moved away from encouraging people to vote yes on 26 and focused more on asking them to vote no on 27. So that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the defeat was quite so one-sided in that respect. It's quite an astonishing result. It's quite surprising, and I think that the shame of the situation is that for people in California, who now, of course, have no option if they want to place a bet, but to do so either by crossing state lines or by using offshore unregulated operators, is that if you'd offered them a simple yes or no question, would you like to be able to bet on sports online in your home state in a regulated way that generates tax for the state budget? I think, you would have had an overwhelming majority of people saying yes. And so there's a bit of political toing and froing, which has unfortunately yielded quite a negative result for the actual people living in California. That's my view on it.
Yeah, I think maybe the operators should recruit you to do their lobbying efforts for them, Connor, as they've said 2024 now, haven't they? They've got their eye on. But, there's a really interesting Financial Times piece on this topic this week. And Chad Bainan, who's, a quite well-known gaming industry analyst at Macquarie Group, he said, "I've never seen anything in my career that's been this big of a flop." He said, if they barely manage 20% of the votes with hundreds of millions spent, and how much more are they going to have to spend to get it passed? Yeah. We are arguably further away from legal sports betting in California than we were before the campaign.
Yeah. And
so effectively what he's saying there is, operators have spent in excess of 600 million to take themselves further away from having sports betting in California.
Yeah. And that, of course, is an attempt to get regulation passed, which would see them have to pay, is it not $100 million for a license? So how many operators can possibly afford to spend hundreds of millions on marketing in order to get the regulation through, pay a further 100 million for the license, and then subsequently spend who knows how many hundreds of millions on customer acquisition, marketing, advertising costs, as we already see these major operators hemorrhaging money in the US. Somebody said to me recently, actually, I had a really interesting conversation about this, and somebody said for DraftKings specifically, which of course has just been pouring money into customer acquisition for many years now, for DraftKings it was a bit of a saving grace, if anything, that the California bill didn't go through, because if they were now confronted with having to pay that 100 million licensing fee and then all the subsequent spending on marketing and advertising, it could be curtains for the business, essentially. It's like they haven't got that much cash left at this point.
Yeah, that's you've touched on the most interesting point for me there, which is, first of all, California was obviously one of the biggest, is the biggest states by economy in the US, and leads the top three of California, Florida, and Texas, none of which have obviously moved to legalize online sports betting or iGaming. So it's kind of putting a bit of a ceiling on the prospects of the industry that before everyone thought it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And I think this California pushback has tilted the narrative even further in that direction. And I think Chad pointed that out again in this piece that, if we're seeing pushback on sports betting already before the three biggest states have even got involved, kind of where does that leave iGaming proliferation in the US, which is limited to just 5 or 6 states today, and is obviously the most lucrative part of an operator's business. But you talked about DraftKings as well there, Connor. And I'm just thinking about, so 600 million, obviously that's combined between a few companies spent, 100 million license fee.
And it's from both sides, the 600 million, I believe.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not impossible to imagine a scenario where an operator has spent, 500 million quid on California, and it's not even legalized. It's not even legalized gambling, online gambling. Yeah. It's absolutely crazy to think about.
And even if it had, as we've seen in New York, the regulators' primary objective is not to generate as much money as possible for the licensed operators. You look at New York with a 50% tax rate. It's like, well, the New York essentially said, well, come and operate here if you want, but we're going to take all the money off you. So be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And what was the tax rate in the California bill? Did it have a tax rate set? Excuse my ignorance.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You've put us all on the spot there.
Sorry.
I should know.
No, let's assume it was something else.
I don't know if it got that far, but it certainly wasn't going to be as steep as New York, where, we've already seen companies say it's impossible to make money. And California, like you say, with the cost of launching there, would have been a similar thing. And the biggest point of the conversation in the US still is profitability. Mm-hmm. How would that be possible with having to launch operations in California as well? That's going to push those kind of 2023 guidance levels back by a number of years. I mean, DraftKings is, if we're talking about profitability guidance for 2023, they're forecasting another 550 million in losses. So, it's, you're right to point out what could have happened to them had that ballot gone through in California.
And you can probably count on one hand the operators who would actually be able to even come up with that kind of cash. There's probably only 4 or maybe 5 or 6, but it's not going to become a UK market with 1,000 licensees, is it? Certainly not.
Yeah, to give some numbers as well. So that was, first of all, we've always been speaking about the Magic 7, like the FanDuels and the DraftKings. When they actually filed for the Prop 27, I'm pretty sure they had the cash. Then what they also did was like, so first of all, they didn't agree on a specific tax rate, but what they were claiming is between 15 up to 18%, I don't know the precise number, of the earnings will be given to the homeless and poor. So that was their kind of underlying to go for the Prop 27. So we did not yet see any kind of tax rate, but this is how they actually sliced and diced their Prop 27. And for sure, if you're walking around in San Francisco, you will see a lot of homeless and poor people. And that's why they specifically were aiming for, okay, so whatever money we're making, we will hand it over to the homeless and poor. So that was their underlying.
Yeah, that never sat particularly comfortably with me. I wonder if that was an error of judgment in the first place, kind of painting, the gaming industry as some kind of white knight that's going to ride in on horseback and put an end to homelessness in California. I wonder if the optics didn't play particularly well there. But also, you have to consider how much of the campaign was actually spent on pushing that message compared to how much of it was spent on, bashing the local tribes that already have built up a huge amount of respect and loyalty within that state over a number of years now. But yeah, they've said 2024. Both Amy Howe and Jason Robbins said that. I think they're going to have an absolute mountain to climb and a lot more money to spend. But Connor, you were saying earlier that you think it still could be, in all likelihood, California will legalize at some point.
In my view and with my limited knowledge of American culture, to me, it looks like an inevitability. I think the most important thing for 2024, if they're aiming to get this back on the ballot, is going to be getting the question right. And I suppose there's not likely to the rivalry that we've seen between the tribes and the commercial gaming operators is not going anywhere. That's going to carry on. But I think that one of those options is going to have to make itself more attractive to Californian voters than the other somehow. But my view of American culture is that the pinnacle and the key and the most important thing that American culture is built on is that personal liberty and personal freedom, civil liberties. And so it seems, we have a very different perspective on it coming from the UK, where we've grown up with, a highly mature, regulated market. Even, online regulations were introduced while I was still a child. I've always had, gambling as part of our culture. And I guess in California and in lots of US states, that's very different. And it's viewed with a certain amount of suspicion and a lot of negativity. But to me, from that kind of personal liberties perspective, it seems absurd that an advanced economy like California wouldn't have sports betting. And even if the optics of the question of using gambling revenue to solve homelessness and to support mental health services didn't quite work out, it's, it remains true that there are great problems in California that need to be solved. And that additional tax revenue is going to be needed in order to do that. And so for the state government, for the people on the ground, for the businesses in the country, in the US, it's like everybody's losing right now. That's why it seems to me that if logic prevails eventually, if people can get their ideas in order and generate some kind of agreement, then it seems to me that it's essential. It must come through eventually. But who knows? Maybe 2024 comes around and they just miss the mark again and pour another $500 million after something that's never going to come to pass.
Yep, we'll see. And there's plenty more reporting to be done from California, including from Ryan this week, I'd imagine. So keep your eyes on our news portal for further updates there. But yeah, California obviously a pretty major setback for the US gambling industry. But that isn't to say it's not thriving at the moment. So the latest Q3 2022 numbers have come out from the American Gaming Association yesterday, and it's worth pointing out. Obviously, that covers the land-based sector, so all the slots and land-based casinos, but also online gambling. And revenue reached a record quarterly high of 15.17 billion this year. Which beats the previous quarterly high set in Q2, so a matter of months ago.
I think that's
so it's on quite a trajectory.
I think that's about what the UK market does annually, isn't it? Don't we generate something like 12 billion? I don't know if that's online only or if it's online and land-based.
I think that's combined,
yeah. So, in terms of the raw numbers, that makes sense. Their population probably 4 to 5 times bigger than ours. Revenue about 4 times what ours is at the moment. So maybe that suggests maybe we're going to start to see a plateau fairly soon, Jake. What do you think? I mean, we've seen such rapid growth, obviously amazing figures to be generating that amount of money in a single quarter. But do you think we're getting somewhere towards a mature US, not extra mature, but certainly not mild either, somewhere in the middle, a kind of mature market, if we use the sliding cheddar scale of maturity, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would depend, heavily on state legislation on the online side, and how much expansion there is, because it's dried up a little bit the last year or so.
Yeah.
And it's worth also pointing out, other mitigating factors like the pandemic, for example, where we saw all the casinos closed. I think there's still a bit of a bounce back factor from that. So land-based slots and table games still contributed 12.27 billion of that total. So
wow,
yeah, it's pretty significant. The land-based sector is not to be sniffed at in the US.
And bear in
sports
mind,
betting. Sorry, online sports betting also rose 80.6% on last year. So that shows the rate that the market is growing at for online betting. It's just a shame, obviously, California couldn't be added to that.
Yeah. Well, we've got how many state launches planned for early 2023? 3 or 4? Massachusetts, Maryland, Ohio.
Ohio. Yeah.
So that's going to obviously generate some growth in terms of sports betting, and of course some major additional costs for the big operators, as we were discussing before. But yes, for the time being, I think we still have significant growth to be seen. I think another interesting point, as you mentioned, the pandemic, Jake. I think the US is one of relatively few countries which still has some kind of COVID-related travel restrictions in place for international visitors. It's certainly conceivable that has impacted visitor numbers, and that we can expect those to continue increasing for the next couple of years as that kind of bounce back carries on. Do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And the other question these numbers sort of throw out there is, again, this question of how resilient gambling is in times of economic crisis. We've heard that a few times. We heard it obviously in 2008 when the financial crisis happened, and I read something this week that said that's fine, but it didn't give cadence to the fact that the online sector of gambling wasn't very mature then, so it was obviously going to grow because the people were still coming across from land-based. Whereas now, like you pointed out, Connor, we already have a more mature online gambling environment globally, but these revenue figures point out that it still is far and ahead of a lot of other sectors. So US commercial gaming's annual growth rate to Q3 2022 is 8.8%. And if you compare that to the broader US economy's growth rate, it's just 2.6%.
And I suspect you'll be able to see that in terms of employment as well across the US. I don't know, I haven't checked, but I expect if you go to FanDuel's careers website right now, you'll find plenty of open positions for software developers and web developers and all those kinds of things across the US. And then if we look at places, companies like Meta, like Twitter, which obviously has been in the news a great deal recently. I mean, how many people did Meta lay off yesterday? 11,000 or something?
Yeah, 11,000.
Yes. So, I mean, if you look at the employment figures, it seems like sports betting and online gaming, in the same way as the revenue growth shows us, is just kind of head and shoulders above a lot of the rest of the economy at the moment.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
if we kind of compare these numbers, especially with the UK, we should not forget one fact, that we're speaking about a country or a state like North America, where only 31 of the states have legalized online sports betting, excluding three of the biggest states, California, Texas, and Florida. So I'm pretty sure if you can easily compare the existing states, probably also population-wise, with the UK. And the number you mentioned, 12 billion from the UK, is retail and online, excluding lotteries. So the lotteries are always taken out within these numbers. And if we compare the 2021 numbers with the 2022 numbers, just keep in mind that New York has just been added to the 2022 numbers, and this is one of the biggest markets overall. Of course, they increase. But if you don't have this on mind, like, okay, sports betting increased like 80% annually. If we would take out the sports betting figures from New York, I'm pretty sure there will still be an increase of roughly 25-28%, but not that much like 80%. But as soon as further and further markets actually open up, of course, these numbers increase as well.
Yeah, it's a bigger, exactly. It's a larger and larger addressable market every time, and I think certain companies, especially affiliates, publicly listed affiliate groups, tend to publish the numbers of first-time depositors and new customers that they're getting, which all of them appear to be showing higher and higher numbers of new customers, and those that break it down by average revenue per customer, I think, are seeing more and more revenue from each customer in every quarter. So you've got the double growth effect there of bringing more and more new customers into the market, and the existing customers spending more and more every quarter. So
yeah, and the barometer of kind of US success at the moment is obviously FanDuel, and they're owned by Flutter, and Flutter said US revenue was up 82% year on year. Obviously they're outperforming their peers, so that's not an accurate reflection of the market, but it just shows what you can achieve in that market with good operational expertise and sensible spend. I don't think we've got time to do a deep dive on Flutter's Q3 results. Sadly, I can hear the audience wailing in despair at that. But I think we're getting close to the hour now. So unless you've got anything further to say, Nico, Connor, we should probably wrap it up there for this week.
Well, let me just mention quickly, Jake, I know you don't like to pat yourself on the back too much, but for those of our viewers who do want to know more about what happened in Flutter's Q3 report, there is an excellent and very nicely written news story by the one and only Jake Evans on iGamingNext.com. So do go and check that out. There's all the information you could dream of, much more than we could give you here on the stream. That's all I'll say.
You're too kind, Connor. That pay rise is on its way. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll get to see you in Sigma next week. Nico, awesome to have you back.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good to see you both, and good to see you all in the audience too.